The SEC and Big Ten are at a stalemate once again. Now, there are a couple of reasons for this fight, but the stalemate comes down to schedule strength and number of conference games. So let's talk about what's actually happening. And I want you guys to all read this. This is John Talty and Brandon Marcello of CBS Sports. A deadline is nearing with the college football playoff tweaks post 2026. Okay. The meetings are taking place between the 10 conference commissioners and Notre Dame's athletic director. And it's what to do with the college football playoff. The SEC significantly wants to revamp the process, but so does the Big Ten. Here is the issue. They don't agree how to go there. So the SEC and Big Ten, the Big Ten wanted an automatic qualifier model for 2026 going forward, where 4 teams from the Big Ten go, 4 teams from the SEC, 2 from the ACC, 2 from the Big 12, and depending on how many playoff teams you have 1 group of 5, which would be 13, and then 3 at large or 1 at large if you could go to 14 teams. The SEC wants a selection committee, but one that tweaks the currently used metrics and weighs strength of schedule more heavily than in the past. So the SEC wants teams to be rewarded for their strength of schedule with a formula. For those who don't know, it was the SEC and Rory Kramer who invented the BCS using a formula. They want a formula that determines the SEC. Now, the strength of schedule rankings last year would have favored the SEC over the committee's rankings. ESPN's FPI is one that the SEC cites. The SEC has broken down how tough the regular season gauntlet is. Now, the SEC with that, they want a 5+11 model where schedule strength is weighed. The Big Ten has come out and said in a model where it's 5+11, which 5+11 model means 5, the top 5 conference champions, and then 11 at large. The Big Ten commissioner, a Big Ten source said there's no amount of data you can pour through to figure out who's better between the 4th place Big Ten team, the 4th place SEC team, and the 2nd place Big 12 team. I recognize people think there are solutions. We've studied it a whole lot, and there's not a whole lot that you can do to tweak it. Here's the roots of it. The root of it is the Big Ten doesn't want a 5+11 format that weighs schedule strength that they think will heavily favor the SEC, when they think the SEC is manipulating the schedule strength to play non-Power 4 teams with better records while avoiding the number of Power 4 teams since they play 8 conference games while the Big Ten plays 9. And you saw this last year where number of conferences total against Power 4 games, there were 93 total Power 4 games by the Big Ten last year and only 82 by the SEC. The 8 versus 9 conference games debate is a huge part of this week's discussions. The 5+11 format that the SEC wants, the Big Ten's only going to get on board if the SEC moves to 9 conference games. Here's the problem. The SEC with 9 conference games, they're not wrong on this point, and I have to point this out. Top heavy 1 through 5, Big Ten and SEC rival each other. Bottom 3, Big Ten and SEC rival each other. But if you take those 8 schools like in the middle, the SEC is so much tougher than the Big Ten. It's not even close with those schools. So if you do 9 conference games in the Big Ten, you're getting a lot of easier matchups for the power teams. Whereas the SEC, on the other hand, that's an extra game that they could potentially lose. The SEC wants a couple of things, and this is why they don't want to move to 9 conference games. One, it could wreck them in terms of they play a more gauntlet of a schedule. They're right about that. It could wear them down for a playoff. But also, even if there was the automatic qualifier format, the SEC could still get multiple teams in if they did a 9 9-game schedule. The problem is there's a TV deal with the SEC that's a problem. And a lot of this falls back on Greg Sankey for signing a bad deal with ESPN. The Big Ten has 9 conference games, but they have a $7-year, $1 billion per year deal across 3 networks. The SEC has a 10-year, $300 million a year deal with one network, ESPN. If the SEC moves to 9 conference games, they don't get any extra. The ESPN will televise about 8 less games. So technically, because there's more SEC teams playing each other, you go from 128 SEC games to 120 games involving SEC teams. This mathematically, that's how that works. But you get more big games. ESPN doesn't mind losing the 8 games that'll be played on SEC Network to get more marquee games on their cable networks that they can sell advertising revenue to. They'll get a lot more money out of that. The SEC, meanwhile, loses those 8 games, loses the attendance from those 8 games, and gets nothing extra from ESPN. So that's where the negotiations are falling apart, is the SEC wants to get a better deal from ESPN, and they can't get the deal they want from ESPN because they signed a bad deal from the start, and I don't blame ESPN for doing that. All this boils down to this. The Big Ten wants the automatic qualifier format. The SEC wants the 5+11 format. The Big Ten will agree to the 5+11 format if the SEC goes to 9 games. The SEC can't go to 9 games until they work out a deal with ESPN that ESPN is not going to agree to. Hence, the stalemate. With this stalemate, I don't think the SEC is as diametrically opposed to the automatic qualifier format. The compromise is going to be this, and it's Bank on It, brought to you by Commercial Bank, member FDIC, Life Made Better. The automatic qualifier format will take hold. And then the selection committee will more heavily weigh schedule strength for the final 3 at-large spots. Bank on it.
Commercial Bank is your neighborhood bank. What makes us different from other banks? We understand that every customer has unique opportunities, challenges, and financial concerns. We don't expect you to fit into the same box as the next person or business. Whether it's purchasing a home, saving for your child's future, or planning for your next vacation, we're with you every step of the way to navigate life's big decisions. Commercial Bank. Life made better.
Yes, Bank on it. The automatic qualifier format is going to be the format for the 2026 college football playoff. What does that look like? Again, the Big Ten wants automatic qualifiers because they got 4 teams in last year and were lucky to get 4 teams in because it was based on schedule strength. The SEC only got 3, but the SEC's 14th, 15th, and 16th teams, or 13th, 14th, 12th, 13th, and 14th ranked teams were all SEC teams. So in a 5+11 model, had they expanded to 16, the SEC would have had 6 teams in with the Big Ten 4. The SEC, the automatic qualifier model is going to look like this. The SEC gets 4 teams in. The Big Ten gets 4 teams in. The ACC gets 2 teams in. The Big 12 gets 2 teams in. The Group of 5 gets 1 team in. That's 13 spots guaranteed off the top for conferences. Now, here's where the fight's going to come. The Big Ten's going to want to keep it at 14 teams. And that 14th spot will be reserved for Notre Dame or 1 extra school. The SEC is going to want it to go to 16 teams if it's going to be automatic qualifiers, so they can get their at-large bids in the form of Alabama, South Carolina, and Ole Miss, and what it would have been last year, at which point you would still have 6 SEC teams in. Now, with that in mind, or you would have had at least 5 last year if Notre Dame got in. But you guys see the point I'm saying here? The automatic qualifier model, more than anything, slightly reduces the SEC's power. But the SEC can still wield power there, so the compromise will be schedule strength. The compromise is going to be schedule strength, and here's the other part. Here's what they're going to throw in there. Back in the old days, this was the BCS days, I think, they put in a new stipulation that to be eligible for an automatic berth in a BCS bowl game, if you won a title, you had to be ranked somewhere in the BCS. You had to have a minimum ranking. The way the automatic qualifier model might work is this. Here's where the SEC will agree to it. You can have automatic bids per conference, but there has to be a minimum ranking to get an automatic bid. Because, again, Big 12, ACC, the reason this is so ridiculous is Big 12, ACC, SEC, Big 10. This isn't that it favors the Big 10 or the SEC. The team that's getting the most benefit out of the automatic qualifier model is the Big 12. The Big 12 had Arizona State and BYU last year as the only real college football playoff contenders at the end, okay? I guess you could maybe throw in Iowa State. But in reality, Arizona State and BYU. If you did a 5+11 model, it wouldn't be the Big 10 that was hurt. It would be the Big 12 that was hurt. If you did a top 16, it wouldn't. If you did auto conference bids, however you did it, the Big 12 is the one that benefits the most from the automatic qualifier because nobody from the Big 12 qualified to get into the playoff outside of Arizona State. So you would have had 2 teams from the Big 12 get in instead of 1. When you look at that automatic qualifier model, I think the SEC may come to an agreement of you have to at least, to be an automatic qualifier, you have to at least be in some sort of ranking. Now, the Big 12 still would have had enough teams get in last year because BYU and Iowa State would have met that minimum ranking. But there's going to be a year where the second best team in the Big 12 or the ACC is not even in the top 25. And that's going to be a big issue. The other flaw with the automatic qualifiers is the group of 5 may not agree to that. They may prefer the SEC model because last year, Army, UNLV, and Memphis all made pushes to be an extra group of 5 team alongside Boise State. So we're going to have to see how this all plays out. But I'll just say this, the SEC and the Big 10 are at a stalemate, and it's not just about the 9-game schedule. That's a stalemate for the 5+11 model that the SEC wants so badly. Brett Bielema gave a revealing quote the other day where he said, I don't think there is any way we can do a 16-team playoff if they're not at 9, referring to the SEC going to 9 games. And this is what we're talking about. To ice out the SEC a little more, the reason they're going to want the automatic qualifier at just 14 teams. That keeps those mid-tier 9 and 3 SEC teams from getting in. They don't like that principle if the SEC doesn't have 9 games on their schedule. But again, the SEC can't afford to do 9 games because they signed a bad deal with ESPN and they can't lose that money. So it's interesting how this all plays out. The SEC has the better argument on principle. I agree. But it's Greg Sankey's fault that they're in this situation because of the fact that he signed a really bad deal with ESPN. Signed a really, really, really bad deal with ESPN. And that's why they are in this situation.